All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Cris Ippolite, and welcome to a special edition of the podcast. I'm here in one of my favorite places, live on location in Austin, Texas. Why am I in Austin, Texas? Well, I'm here to visit with my friend and colleague, our guest today, Kate Waldhauser from the Austin area. Kate, welcome.
Thank you, Cris. I'm very happy to be here. This is exciting, and I'm really excited about what we get to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. And before we jump into today's topic, which I think is going to be very important for us to discuss, this is something that you and I talk about quite a bit. But first, let's back up. Kate, tell us a little bit about Violet Beacon, some of the work you're doing in the AI space, and people will naturally kind of see the types of things that we talk about together offline.
Yeah.
So first, tell us about Violet Beacon.
So, I know we're gonna get more into our individual stories about how we see AI, how we came to those beliefs. But really, when I formed Violet Beacon, which is about a year ago, so still a fairly new company, I became really, almost infatuated with the idea of responsible AI. And so Violet Beacon, what we do is we help companies really develop strategy around AI as well as implementation, but really focused on responsible AI. And I know we'll get into more of what that looks like and what the standards are and how you develop this. But for right now, I'll just mention that concept of responsible AI is what we're doing.
I love that. I think that I think there's maybe a presumption that without deliberately mentioning responsible AI as an approach, that it might be irresponsible AI approach. And certainly there's ineffective AI, which I think is, can fall into that category as well too. But I really look forward to getting into that as well too. And then also a lot of the work, I've been following your human intelligence work. We're going to talk about that and weave that into the discussion here today. And why is this perspective so important? Well, today's episode this is a big one, and we're going to how do these things weave together? We're talking about fear, trust, and the playbook of success for AI deployments. So fear and trust, and how do we get to successful AI deployments? Well, I think we're going to focus first on the fear part. So we want to really have a discussion, and what this is framed for is for executives who are making decisions about AI and deployments and how to measure success. And the other part that we're formally acknowledging is that this is the beginning of 2026, and really the consensus across the industry from all the pundits is this is the year that AI has to show ROI, right? And so we're going to talk about how we get there. We're literally at the second half of our podcast going to go through in a very prescriptive fashion, like these nuggets, the playbook for AI success. But let's talk about fear first, Kate. Why so much fear with AI? Where do we think this is coming from, right? I mean, it's certainly a cognitive bias. There's some real unknowns out there, job anxiety. There's certainly media framing. We're going to talk about that today. But I mean, what's your take on this? Why the fear? Where's this coming from?
So I like to think, first of all, I read a lot, so I just am ingesting a lot of information, and that involves, right, the headlines that we're reading. But also, I personally try to dig deeper and go into and look at historical perspectives. So, lately I've been really curious about what are these tech cycles really looking like? And so I dig in and read deeper into these. So I've been thinking, like, one analogy that keeps coming up for me is about driving, right? It's about the invention of the car. And if you look at some of these like more historical perspectives of what was written about, when the car came up, it was like the horseless menace, and that there was a lot, they tried to outlaw cars, right? I'm talking about right now in like the late 19th century.
Oh yeah. This is when if you saw a horse and buggy coming, you would have to move your car off to the side, get out, because the machine scared the horses. So you had to like get way off the road or something. It was crazy, the perspective back then.
Yeah. And the streets weren't meant for cars. They were meant for people, and you could have a conversation. I mean, if you think about it, like the car, and I know we can probably talk about this like as we talk about it, but it changed our way of living, our society. I mean, businesses were built up around it. So I think of this like in a way just to remind myself that like this fear, right, of everything's changing isn't new. It's actually a normal response to new technology in these technology cycles. but also am reminded that, okay, and we made it through. We now have cars, and now we're moving into self-driving cars.
Oh, I took a robo-taxi in here today.
Yeah.
So, I mean, talk about the bookend of that. I'll tell you what, we're going to do a really fun exercise. I got a surprise for you. We're going to do a looking back in time. What technology were these headlines describing at what time period? And cars aren't one of them, but we're going to talk about a bunch of them, and we're going to test that. But first, as sort of a context, I think it's important that I think it's actually critically important that when you're hearing anyone talk about AI, what perspective are they coming from? And right now, maybe, and I think what we're going to say and what you just described with cars is that this is very much like every technology evolution. You start off with optimism and pessimism. And so there's a scale, there's a spectrum, so to speak, right now. And you did some really interesting work on your own self-assessment. So my question for you is like, where do you put yourself on that? And did you in fact put yourself there? Or do you have some other mechanism that you use to determine where you're at from an AI optimism to pessimism scale?
So yeah, I think, again, as I mentioned, I read a lot, I ingest a lot of information. And so I did an experiment where I took all the books, that I had been reading, so I'm not looking at news here, just books that I've been reading. And I, put them in a database, and then I used some AI to analyze them by putting some descriptions of, and I chose 4 different categories. Now there's many different categories you could have, but the 4 categories I chose were naysayer, doomsayer, pragmatist, and techno-optimist. So to define those, so the naysayer is the person who says, "Oh, this AI is garbage. It's never going to happen. It's like this doesn't work. This is going to be fly by night, and it's going to be gone."
Yep.
Okay. The doomsayer says, we're all doomed, right? This is going to destroy us. This is the end of humanity. So these are the extremes, right?
Sure.
The pragmatist is more, of course, the problem solver. It's like, okay, here's this new technology. What can I actually do with it? Like, how can we actually make
Curious. There's a little curiosity.
Little curiosity,
Not
yeah.
blind optimism.
Yes. And then the techno-optimist is more like the extreme, but also thinking like AI is going to save us all, right? That we're not going to survive. Right.
Oh, we're not going to survive. Oh.
Like, well, maybe.
Without it.
Sorry.
Yeah,
That's like the opposite of the doomsayer,
Of
right?
course.
The doomsayer says it's going to destroy us. The techno-optimist says like,
it's going to save us.
This is going to save us. And so I think, when I took my database of books and I, kind of divided it into these or categorized it a little bit, and of course I wouldn't say, these are general broad stroke categories. And of course, when you read somebody's, it's more than just, that, like there's much more to the message. But in these general categories, most of the books I was reading were by pragmatists. And maybe that, as I'm thinking about that, it's like, well, maybe most, in this realm, of writing, long form books, that maybe those are more pragmatists because you have a lot more area to write, so you can write about some of the pros and cons. But
that's interesting.
But some of them definitely fed into the doomsayer, naysayer, techno-optimist. So you kind of find it on all.
So would you say because your information sources are a pragmatist that you've put yourself in that same category?
That's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Because I have a theory that like the information we absorb and read, and it's influencing us. Like, yes, I have ideas of my own, but really I know that all of my ideas have been influenced by what I'm ingesting, what I'm talking about with other people. Like, I know that. Although I do think part of my nature is to be a pragmatist, that I don't want to close myself off.
Context into this,
yes.
right? Like, yeah.
Yes.
And I think that happens a lot too. And in our our next segment, we're going to talk about if you just read headlines versus content, that you might see something. We're going to look into a little bit of a headline Rorschach test here.
Yes.
So maybe you're self-identifying or pulling from something. And I think that really speaks to what you said. In the long form, you really have to explore beginning, middle, and end to your concepts. Whereas in the shortest form, which is headline reading, you can see whatever you want to see.
Yeah.
And we'll go into a little bit of that. As a matter of fact, I guess in fairness, I will tell you where I believe I land on that scale.
Yeah.
I think I would probably have to fall under optimist. But here's a really important part of my journey that I think is important to share. I started off as a pessimist, or whatever the doomer was. I was lucky to get one of the first 100 API keys back in 2020. I didn't know what that meant. I was a ML guy, back then, and I was just looking for another cloud resource that could do some of these cool things like classification of data, summarization, that type of thing. And so I had a think week where I was going off into some rental home in Big Sur for 2 weeks, where I was just going to be off the grid except for a little hand crank internet. And I was going to explore this weird new API that I just got. And my initial reaction, Kate, was, oh my God, this is going to change everything. I'm not ready for this. What is this going to mean for my business? I was immediate doom. So much so that I didn't even tell my coworkers at iSolutions at all about this discovery I made, where normally the very next morning I'll be like, guys, check this out. It's amazing. But here's the thing. Over those 5 years, I have moved further and further towards optimism for one main reason, because I read the papers, because I'm actually deploying and building. In the early years, doing things wrong, figuring out what tools I had to, what guardrails are available. And now we're deep into implementation cycles where we are setting expectations with clients, with ourselves, building, deploying, and actually seeing the proof points. So I'm happy to say I emerged out of doom into optimism through actual application. And I think that's probably what we would prescribe the most to people if they're curious about these things. But still, we have to interact with others. So one of the interesting things to help us kind of get into, like the what are we looking at with these information sources, was there was an article that I got sent to twice last week from two of my biggest clients, and they're smart, really intelligent, thoughtful individuals. So I thought I would pick them, and it was the same article. And this article went viral. This is the article, by the way, that was called "Salesforce Executives Say Trust in Generative AI Has Declined." That we can kind of see what that message is saying, right? This came out in The Information. It was a good article. There's a few quotes in here that really made the headlines, and I wanted to talk through a couple of these with you, because what I think this is an interesting exercise of is, let's look at the quote. What can we derive from this? Is there something helpful from this? And then what we'll do is apply that to some other papers and articles that we've read, with the idea of giving executives a playbook for AI success. So first of all, you saw the headline first. What did you think when I was sending this over to you?
Well, I think it's I really try not to take a headline with a grain of salt, because it's not telling, right? So I
think I know.
I'm like, oh, okay. So, just to zoom out for 1 second, right? It's, in case it's not known by, most people, that headlines are meant to sell a story, right? It's like they need you to engage us, right?
Of course.
And that's obvious.
Practical.
Like, it's obvious to say it, but I think, like, psychologically, we might forget that, and there's so many. I think I looked up some number. There's like over 200 cognitive biases, right? So I have a little bit of a background in psychological research, and what it shows you is, like, we're right. So by reading this one sentence, 5 words, however long the headline is, we're going to have an immediate reaction, and those cognitive biases are going to play into it. So if that bias says something that agrees with what, like, I already believe, then I'm going to be like, oh, it's confirmation, right? See, there it is, right? But it really takes, like, you kind of have to dig a little deeper. So
or
back
read
to that
beyond the headline.
Right.
I mean, I'm not passing judgment.
Right.
I do this probably every time I scroll through my timeline. I'm not pretending that I'm infallible here.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah, I mean, I do it too. Like, sometimes, like, I don't have time to read a whole story. I'm just going to read a headline. Like, I can't make time for every single thing. But that article, yes, I looked at it, then I read it, of course, because I was like, okay, well, what does this mean? So I guess my initial reaction is really curiosity, is why did they say that? And then I want to look into it and understand, well, what made them say that? So, yeah.
Well, I think that's wise. I can't say I always do that, but in this case I had to, because I actually got sent this from two of my clients, and they were asking for my opinions. So, of course, this was a drop everything, look into this and see what this actually means. In one case, it was a front office client that's actually, big Salesforce user, and they were looking at it more from the Salesforce perspective than the AI perspective. And in another one, we were actually building, we're building something that relies heavily on AI, and we're wondering, hey, is this going to be the best bet? So, and actually, you know what, there's definitely a bias in media. Anecdotally, I can share with you that a couple of years ago, one of my PR friends asked me, hey, you should go on one of these shows and respond to some of these anti-AI narratives. And I'm like, yeah, I don't, it wasn't a good place to be professionally a couple of years back, like being the one person saying that AI is good. But I said, where are you getting these from? And there are these like, if you're writing an article and you're a reporter or something, or you're doing something on television or one of the networks, you can put, go to these, I don't know, places where PR agents or expert, people will look, and you'll say, this is the article I'm writing. Here's what my intent is. This is what my approach is. And so I'm looking for someone that can speak to blah, blah, blah. So I asked him if he could download all these to me from his system, which he did. And I ran through, I don't know, there was like 1,500 of them from like a few years. And I found 83% of them slanted negative against AI. So I that was how I determined, well, I don't want to be that guy, the one guy who's getting beat up, because I don't think they're looking for someone to come up with a constructive response. I think they're looking for somebody to beat up on. Yeah. So I was wondering, is that the case here? Well, there's a couple of things that really stuck out here. This, by the way, this article went viral. A lot of people picked up on it, and it was really because of these 4 quotes. And I thought maybe you and I could dig in on the 4 quotes, because I really think that there's really positive, very constructive things to take away from these. That might be my optimism, but maybe you can bring a little bit, further towards the center perspective of it. But the first thing is the use of the term determinism. And actually, determinism or deterministic has become a pejorative term in the AI world, which I find fascinating, because a little bit of background, you and I come from the most deterministic world in tech that we can, and we're in custom software. This is, we're in an industry that's been around for 40 years, and we've always built totally deterministic, predefined workflow applications, so that when our users run these things, they always go boom, 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 all the way through the process. So first of all, determinism isn't bad, right? I mean, well, how did it get so bad?
Yeah. No, I do completely agree with you. And, I think, because I remember watching Mark Benioff when he made this big announcement.
It was like, so just to frame it up, so this was in 2025, maybe end of summer. Oh no, it was the fall. It was probably at Salesforce, Dreamforce.
I thought it was December 24. I don't know. Yeah. But,
okay. Oh yeah. Oh no. Right. When he said they were going to move towards agents, they're going all in on agents. I'm sorry.
Right.
Yeah. No.
Right.
Even better. Yeah.
Because this article is really about agent force.
It is.
And so he made some very big claims about this is good, and there were a lot of claims made about
all in
on agents. Yeah. And so when I read that and the determinism, I mean, first of all, I guess it makes me feel a little bit better, because as we know in custom software development, things don't always go exactly as you think they're going to go, right? That sometimes you have to pivot, and that's actually a really good thing, right? You need to be able to pivot and notice, okay, this isn't working, let's go in this direction. And you need to be able to, because if you knew everything ahead of time before you announce it, like, now this is the CEO of Salesforce. I know this is a little bit of a different deal.
Well, and Mark Benioff is known for being a bit of a Barnum and Bailey sensation. I mean, he's very effective.
True.
He's the no software guy, created SaaS in the first place. I mean, it's brilliant.
Right.
He's historic in this. So
yeah.
He did it there, with Agent Force.
Right. So I think when I watched his, I probably took it as I take a headline, which is, okay, let's see how this turns out, right? Because he's making claims, but they're futuristic. Like, how do you really know how this is going to turn out? But the decision to bring determinism back into the software or in whatever element makes perfect sense. And like what I think a lot of people don't realize is this is happening, AI in itself is a little bit hard to grasp at times, right? Because it means so many things, and it's a huge, but determinism is brought into is into the process of making AI, of training AI, right? So that's how they put in guardrails. So I think, from a business perspective, determinism is a very valuable tool, and it's actually in AI to a degree more than we think. This concept that, a model is doing everything, and it's
well, look at the system prompt. You can just go search for system prompts for all of the consumer ID products out there. You can find the system prompt for ChatGPT, Claude, all of them.
Right.
They literally are starting every interaction that a user has with this deterministic construct.
Right.
Right. They're instructions really, but they're intended not to just have this Wild West experience with the models.
Right.
And I think determinism is being kind of while it was, being deliberate and having a structure to what you're trying to accomplish with technology in the past, now in the AI era, it's almost become the antithesis of autonomy. And I think if anything, if you can see in some of these things that are in this article and Salesforce's position, by the way, they Benioff dog-fooded his approach. They let go like 200, 300 hires or did not hire more to fill these positions because they were using agent force specifically internally as well too. But from my experience, what I find is that, 2025 was the year of the agent. And first of all, there's a million different definitions of what agents truly are. But for our conversation today, let's frame agents up as allowing the LLM to create its own plan, introducing it to the tools and potentially data sources that it wants to use to be able to answer the user's question, let's say. And then at the end, it comes back and it uses the reflective properties that we saw emerge in the GPT-4, 4.5 era of reflection, to be able to look back on its plan to determine whether or not it executed properly, right? So an agent can do all of those things. And so the promise, especially in 2025, was like, oh, you can do entire job roles and just let this thing do its thing autonomously and just YOLO AI against a job. Now, if you look at that, again, versus determinism, mean that everything is totally structured, they're not black or white. It's not one or the other. But if you look at what their promises were, they did say that they're executing a 93% of it within agent force. They're having 93% success. I can't even believe it. I mean, that's it. I'll take it all day long, 93%. But what they're saying is in that delta, in the 7%, they introduced deterministic guardrails, meaning more instruction, more sort of controlling the behavior, which I imagine, what's your take on this? I would assume it had to do with what the actual agent use case is. Like some probably require more determinism than others. I would think more than 7% require determinism.
Yeah. And it, like you said, like there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think this conception is a misconception that AI, that this non-deterministic agentic AI is supposed to do everything. We're supposed to be.
And I don't believe that, by the way. Maybe that doesn't make me a total optimist. I don't believe that agents can do everything. Yeah. Maybe we're not there yet. Maybe we'll get there. I don't think we have to, though. Right. It's a very hammer and nail in our industry with agents everywhere, really.
Yeah. I mean, it's sometimes, I think about the future. It's like, well, we just have no idea what's going to be like. We're saying this now, 20 years from now. I don't know, but
22.
2 years.
Hold on, 20 years.
2 years.
No way, man.
20 years is way too hard to imagine. Oh yes, but I was thinking that oh God, I just lost my train of thought.
Well, I was
thinking about my daughter in 20 years. I was like, oh wait, she's gonna be 27. What is that? Like, I don't know. My brain went off.
I can't even squint that hard to see down the road. I mean, 2 years seems impossible. But what I can tell you in the last year is that determinism is part of the process. And we're going to talk a little bit about picking the right places to integrate AI. But what I've seen, and I can be very prescriptive with this, is that you should start with trying to build a base where your goal is that AI could autonomously or dynamically adapt to whatever the inputs are, but you should immediately move into providing the guardrails to kind of force it in the path that you want it to be. Not like putting in, if this, then that type approaches, but literally just saying, hey, look, there's a place for when we want the nuance that a language model brings. And then frankly, there's other places where it's just not necessary. Some of the things in this report we're pointing to using agents to create a report and guide somebody through filling out the form. And it was going off track sometimes. And to me, it's like, why are we using AI to fill out a form? Like I think we solved that problem already, for example. So that's sort of the thing that I think about, and specifically some of the things they were pointing to in this paper. So I think the takeaway, I think we both agree here, start with determinism, perhaps. Start with a framework that can answer things as dynamically as you're able to execute on, but then start with deterministic use cases and then branch out to more general ones from there. But the key is don't start with deterministic programming and try to branch out from there, because what I've experienced, and I've seen this firsthand, is you'll just paint yourself into a corner that you can't get out of, and you'll end up having to start all over again, which I think is one of the reasons why these AI pilots are failing, which I will actually see in the MIT report. Let me ask you this one, though. Prompting. A lot of people think interacting with AIs is just everybody has to be a prompt engineer. You have to have this big, long prompt. The term for this is called single shot prompting. I do use that term pejoratively when I identify maybe some single shot prompting that I'm seeing happening. Well, that was directly addressed here. So let me get your thoughts on this quote. So one of the quotes was, actually, I'll combine two of the quotes together and respond interested in your response here. So if you give an LLM more than 8 instructions, which by the way sounds like a lot of instructions for one prompt. So I think what they're really saying here, if you give a single prompt to an LLM more than 8 instructions, it starts dropping them. Combine that with another quote from folks at Salesforce that says, agents will lose focus when users ask tangential questions. By the way, that second one framed up the agents guiding someone through creating a form example I just mentioned to you a moment ago. But in your prompting exercises, don't you sort of get like that little itch, like I'm giving it way too many things for one AI API call to an LLM in the first place? Would you expect 8 instructions to work in one call?
Well, I think this is where the AI, fluency, there's a gap here because if you've never used this tool before, or, you don't know how, there's no instruction. I mean, yes, there are instructions. I mean, there's all sorts of people telling you how to use it.
Sure.
But it's an empty chat box, right? It's just a blank slate, right? And you can put whatever you want in there. Like then you'll start to hit the limits, right? As you realize, wait,
you're talking about context, like literally
right.
context.
But this is something that you learn as you work with the tool, right? It's not somebody. I really think that that's where the best learning comes from. It's not something somebody can actually like give you a lesson in. It's just go out and do it and play with it yourself. So if you didn't know that, then you might expect, this is going to work this way. And I think that like one of the other things that I'm really focused on or, thinking about lately is the model isn't meant to do everything, right? I think there's this misconception that, okay, you're going to have this model and it's just going to do everything. That really what the skill is and what we're working in is what you and I have been doing, like with building custom software, is really thinking through workflows, and it's engineering. It's this structural engineering. It's how do you build a system around the model? So taking just ChatGPT out of the box is useful, but not for everything, right? There's a way you really need to look at it and finesse it and look at your use cases. So I think that plays into this in that prompting isn't everything.
You're nailing it.
Yeah.
I mean, what I can say practically, I'll give a pro tip here. First off, language. What I like to come at it from this. This is where I've seen the most success for our deployments. Instead of having the LLM do everything, assuming that it's this PhD level, all-knowing being that you're going to have take on all these tasks and all the decisions that you need in your workflow, I look at it at the opposite. I want to introduce as many control mechanisms, like the term context engineering became really popular last fall, but it ended up that it's just what everybody who's doing these things successfully is doing, leveraging techniques like RAG, retrieval augmented generation, to bring in your own truth contextually within your interactions, or using stateful memory to actually introduce persistence across these workflows, or just giving it tools like, people who are doing it right know that LLMs can't do math, for example. So instead, identify where math needs to happen, hand it off to a Python environment, or to do sophisticated execution using code execution. Once you realize that those tools are available to you and they're all totally deterministic, then you can then say, well, you should look at your entire workflow and then say, all right, well, do I need an LLM for this? And maybe do experiments to determine whether or not you actually need it. What I found coming out the other end of the tunnel on these many times is you really don't. If you just reduce the load on the LLM to just where the LLM's nuance really comes into play, you can really get some consistency and expected outcomes that way. So when I see something like give an LLM more than 8 instructions, to me, I'm like, your workflow should have as many independent calls to an LLM as you can. Like, you should endeavor to make as many independent calls as you can, mostly because then you can have reaction to them. You can determine whether or not those are tool calls, and different things are leveraged that way. So if you find yourself, not you, just the royal you out there, if you find yourself trying to force everything and you start putting conditions into your prompt and you're saying, okay, and if it comes back and does this, then do this, hey, you just identified a turn. That's where you should actually break these up into two different ones and then really look at whether or not the different calls need to actually be to a model or a tool. I think then determinism becomes positive, and that's how we build applications. How we've been doing this whole time, right? So it's not that unusual.
Right. It's. I think in a way AI is just a natural, progression of software development. I mean. And, we haven't even talked about, vision models and robotics. And of course, that plays in all this. We're focused more on, like, the language models, which, of course, is what's more, but these things are out there, too. And those are getting incorporated in business as well.
You bring up a really important point. Another pro tip I would throw out there is right model for the right job. If you're doing it right, you should not have one big monolithic prompt just speaking to AI and expecting it to do a bunch of things. Let's say you shouldn't expect a call to an LLM to do more than one thing. How's that? And if you find it trying to do 8, break that up into 8 things, right? The other part is it's not all the same model. The experts out there, the really good heavy lifting AI developers out there, that are really moving the needle, what they're really good at is making the smallest possible model do something valuable. So we're going to see a rise of SLMs. It's going to get really awkward when everyone calls AI LLMs because we're in the era of SLMs, small language models, or moving that inference to like the edge or that reasoning to the edge. So I think the more you can get done, first of all, the first pro tip is break things up as much as you can. The second pro tip is don't try to use the biggest, smartest model. As a matter of fact, you have to be cost effective too. So use the free ones or the cheap ones first. I think it'll shock people when they see how capable some of these SLMs are and these on-device models even are. And then when you really need the heavy lifting, push that out to a language model.
Right.
So eight instructions is too many. It should be 8 calls. And then agent lose focus when users ask tangential questions. Well, capture those interactions so you have control over them, and you do that by having multiple calls. Right. Sounds a lot like custom application development, doesn't it?
Right.
Yeah, we didn't have one script that runs our entire application. We had them embedded into the workflows, doing one thing or a couple things at most, right?
Right. And I don't know. I mean, sometimes I think it's because LLMs get so closely related to the human brain, right?
I think that's what's happening.
There's this, it's called brain computational theory, or compute, I don't know, something like that. I'll have to, but anyway, there's this idea that it's just an input and an output, right, in the brain, right? And I don't really believe, I think there's a little bit more to that, but the same with LLMs, just input and output. And it's like, well, I use my own brain to do many different things, right? So is it this conception that, okay, well then I just need one model because it's like a brain, but I don't think that's true because, okay, language is only 10% of the brain, right? So all of my brain power is being used in all of these other ways and senses. I mean, it's way more, right? So what we've built with a neural network with a LLM is only an aspect of the brain. And, there's some great labs and people doing work like Fei Li in World Labs.
Totally what I was going to say. You're nailing it because there's a theory. There's people out there, and don't get them wrong when like Fei, if you asked her, she would say, well, we cannot achieve, I think she's of the school of we cannot achieve AGI or super intelligence through language models alone. I mean, we know some of the biggest ones, the biggest minds out there say that, but they're not saying that AI can't do it. They're saying that we need world. Just to your point, if 10% of our brains are language, well, Fei is actually building worlds, literally worlds. By the way, if you don't yet believe in simulation theory, you will after you see the work that they're doing over there. It's insanity. But let's just pretend that I don't for a second. But what she's saying is just like we need visual inputs and audio inputs, and we need a model to have all of these things to truly be able to be responsive in a general fashion. So just to your point, the brain works that way. So those people who are advocating for that they're not saying language models are not useful. They're saying isolate them to language tasks.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And we need to remember that because it's like people think AI, they think ChatGPT.
Yeah.
That's not. This is not. It's a very minified view of
No doubt.
So
I mean, yeah, probably the other thing that's so interesting about people going right to ChatGPT, Kate, is like how this all happened. I mean, for the first couple years of working with AI, I found myself having to explain to people what I was even talking about. And then that fateful November 2022, ChatGPT comes out, and the fastest application to 1 million active users in the history of man. I mean, it beat out Instagram and all the most viral apps of all time. It became ChatGPT. It became the Band-Aid or the Xerox or the whatever of AI. And it's crazy to think how, like, there were no other players at the beginning of 2023. And here we are 3 years later, and now there's a ton of players here. So yeah, it's fine. But also it made it so that my father knows what AI is, and people who aren't even interested in technology know what AI could be. But it goes beyond chat. And so really, to be careful, we're not talking about chat being the only thing you can do, chatting against data or whatever. We're talking about implementing AI subtly into your workflows here.
Right. Right. But I think in that Salesforce article, they really are referring to LLMs and
100%.
agentic AI that they're discussing. And
they absolutely are. Yeah. And the key there is agents from a technical perspective are LLMs with memory and tool use, right?
Yes.
So it's not other models, like
Unless
vision
the
models.
tool use
Is another model.
So there's right. And then,
Great call.
Yeah.
Well, that's how your mind should work. When you're looking at these things, you should think right model, right job, right tool, right job. And when you start looking at it that way, you're going to not have a lot that the LLMs need to do, is what the thing is.
Yeah.
Here's my favorite one. You and I come from application development world. One of the quotes in here says, better observability lets us see when agents go off topic and iterate quickly. That's kind of like the, no kidding, Sherlock type thing, right? Like, oh, you mean test?
Right.
So you mean actually, like, so for those that aren't familiar, if you're embarking on your first AI application, or you're an executive at a company, deciding, what your team construct is going to look like, make sure that having an eval framework in place is step number one. You cannot start building, and we're not, and just to clarify, for ML ops folks that have yet to embark into the Gen AI world, this is not benchmarking. This is not QA benchmarking. It goes beyond that, because evals are about this black box that we're using. How do we determine whether or not it's being accurate with certain, question answer pairs that we're giving it? But the next step is, well, if it didn't meet our acceptance criteria, now what do I do? So what this gives you is observability into what little knobs you can control. When I give more context to this, does it give me more accuracy, or whatever it is? You can measure relevance of responses this way too. So eval frameworks, critical pro tip before you get started. It is amazing to me. I mean, I guess Salesforce is saying, yeah. And then when you actually use frameworks to test these things, you have more control. I don't know your thoughts. I mean, in fairness, there's a lot of developers who don't test, present company excluded. But I guess this is a human nature thing. But I don't know. It's not that odd, really, I guess, in that regard.
Like going back to my, car analogy here, I think about like, okay, if I was comparing this to the cars, so what was car development like in the 1890s, right? I mean, it was very rudimentary. It wasn't until 1913 that the assembly line, right, the Model T,
Ford,
right? And so I'm like, okay, so there's this time, and I think we're operating on a much tighter time scale than we were at the turn of the century, but that we're still learning and understanding best practices, and I think that's where evals fit in. It should be obvious. But because this new technology is here, and we're like, kind of like, what do we do? And, some people relate it with like magic, and there's this thing. And so we have to kind of rein ourselves in. And I think this is where having a background in custom software, again, really helps, because we have the baseline and the tools for all this. And, in responsible AI, which, I'm going to bring in here, because in responsible AI, it's really just about a set of principles, right? That we're using to guide, every step of the model, or the AI life cycle. And one of those principles is transparency, and that's actually observability, transparency, interpretability all mean slightly different things, but they're all rooted in the same the same idea, which is, you need an audit log. You need to be able to see what actually happened, right?
That's the traceability that they're talking about here. Yep.
Yeah, you need to go back and look at like, well, why was this decision made, right? And that's the interpretability, which, people talk about the black box, aspect of these models, which again, there's new research coming out and new ways that they're actually beginning to trace how the decisions are made in the black box. So again, like we're still in the early days. Like we haven't reached the assembly line yet. I don't think.
I love that. We haven't reached the assembly line yet.
Yeah.
But we have brakes on the car.
Right.
We can still get from A to B.
Right. And and it took those things and I love that. Well, there was, gosh, I can't remember his name. Eno, he was an individual, and he was really fascinated with, he got in his first traffic jam when there were still horse-drawn carriages, and he was like, why are we in this traffic jam? So he took it upon himself, before the government started doing this, to build the first traffic circle and to build the first stop sign. And like, these are things, and so these were developed from private, right? So I think this is where it's like, we all have a part in this. Yes, the government is doing things, and yes, there are global standards being developed, but it's actually up to the individual, and there's nothing stopping us. And it makes just good business sense, as we're learning from Salesforce, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you just need this. It's not, it has to be a given. It can't be an add-on.
So as your pro tip, if you're an executive deciding on team building, whether you're going in-house, out of house to form a team, think about these eval frameworks and think about the responsible elements and how you're going to control those right out of the gate. Is that a fair way to look at this?
Yes, I think so. I think they just have to be a must-have if you're developing an AI system, that you need an eval, you need a way to test it. Yeah, it's
well, you're not going to get far, honestly.
No.
For organizations that I watch kind of learning on their own, that might not be as open to suggestion or influence, I kind of sit back and go, oh, you'll get to the need for evals very quickly. Whenever you're done with your big, long, monolithic prompt and you try to YOLO that against the biggest language model you can find, you're going to find out that you have a lot of areas that you need to isolate and to be able to improve upon. And it's going to be great. Those are going to be the tools and the knobs and the dials you need to get to where you're going. So on our article thing, our headlines from reality. So, we talked about how some people can look at the headline from the Salesforce article and think a certain thing right away. I like to think of this a little bit as the AI headline Rorschach test.
okay.
Now, before we get there, I just want to say you sent me yesterday, as we were preparing for this, a tool, a GPT that you created. You want to talk a little bit about what you did there? I thought it was great.
Yeah, so this is the really cool thing, right? And I'll talk about why I think this is one way to use AI, right? Is you can build a custom GPT, right? So that's what I built, and I put in some instructions, and I basically wanted to be able to upload either an article or a link to an article and have AI, read the article, kind of analyze what was in there and tell me, I gave it a grading rubric, right? So a way to score it, and then tell me what level where it landed, was it signal? Was there actual truth in here? Was it hype? Was it like, hey, there's no real
sensationalism
yes,
or something?
Yes. And so I built this tool, and I haven't really evaluated it totally yet, but it's like, this is a proof of concept, right? I can get it
pre-evals.
Yeah, it's pre-eval, but I could build it really quickly, and then I could start like testing it, and then giving my own, and reading my own. But because, right, we're dealing with language, right? And so much of these articles are just the words that they're used, like, right, how they're used. But then I could also program other, elements in, like, are there supporting facts in here? And what was the incentive? Like, who wrote the paper? What were they getting paid to write it, right? Because a lot of that, we forget about that with, like, well, what's the incentive of the person who's creating this? So
but media's job is to be center and to report objectively on everything. I mean, we know that. I mean, that's the sarcasm coming out in me right now. As a matter of fact, I'm going to play a fun game. We've been a little dry here for folks that have hung in here with us. I'm going to have you be the human headline evaluator tool instead of AI. This is going to be fun. These are real headlines from the emerging technologies over time. I'm going all the way back to the 1700s here, by the way, because to your point, when you look back on like the beginning of 1900s with cars, And you look back on it now, you kind of chuckle to yourself because you're like, oh, how silly, how short-sighted we were. Well, we weren't less intelligent back then. We just didn't know what the future holds yet, right? So to prove that the initial reaction from humans to new technologies, so to speak, can skew negative, and then we eventually settle into it. Let's look back in history at some evolving technologies. I've got about 5 quote-unquote technologies. Now, of course, when we're talking about the 1700s, we're not talking about anything you can plug in. So you got to think, a little bit here. So I'm going to read you the headline and give you a couple of the quotes from it, and you guess which thing they're talking about, okay? So this thing, comma, a cause of female depravity. So from 1797 in the Evangelical magazine, this was talking about this thing was being blamed for corrupting the morals and unhinging the mind of young women, and saying that young women could become unfit for domestic life and incapable of reason if they engaged in this new emerging thing in the 1700s. What might that thing be? This isn't a test for you. We're having
Right.
fun
I know.
here,
Now
but
I'm like,
you're curious, right?
Yeah, now I'm stumped on this one.
Well, it's the novel. So literally,
I was gonna say reading.
it is reading. It literally says, the headline
reading.
says novel reading,
Yeah.
a cause for female
It's a fiction.
depravity.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfit for domestic life and incapable of reason. I think that's proven to be false.
Yeah.
As time came by. So again, we look back on it, it's literally laughable to
Right.
think about it that way, but hopefully we can gain a little bit of
Right.
context here. Okay, next one. Are you ready? Now we're going to move into 1877 from the New York Times headline, "The blank unmasked." This device was accused of enabling constant unseen eavesdropping. There's your cue. And it was warned that it would destroy all privacy and fundamentally alter social relations. That sound familiar?
And I've also heard it was used to communicate with the dead. It's the telephone, right?
Yes, it's the telephone.
Okay.
The telephone unmasked from the New York Times, 1877. Well, the communicate with the dead thing, maybe that never materialized, but the rest of it, but some of these are kind of interesting. Destroy all privacy and fundamentally alter social relations? Interesting, right?
Right.
Now we're going to get into some real doomer stuff here, Kate. Here we go. From 1889, the New York Times headlines, the following: blank as an agent of death. Whoa. This thing was described as a mysterious force which kills without warning, and it could strike invisibly and fatally at a distance.
And this is 1889?
1889, let's just put it this, there was a war going on over 2 different types of technology.
This is the bicycle?
Oh,
No.
Think I rode a robotaxi in this morning from the company Tesla. This was electricity.
Oh!
So the old electricity
of course.
battles with Tesla and Edison, right?
Right.
So they were saying electricity is an
Yes.
agent of death. Just to revisit this, it's a
Yes.
mysterious force which kills without warning. No question.
Let's get rid of it.
But
Yeah.
we learned how to safeguard it. We learned how to literally have babies in a house with electrical outlets that will not, kill them without warning, right? I mean, not to get too crazy there, but this was seen as, oh my God, this is going to kill us all because it's just too powerful. And then we figured out how to harness this, and now literally we are surrounded by electricity, and neither of you or I are concerned about that. Last 2. Lunacy in England, 1894, from the New York Times. There's not the slightest doubt that this activity, if persisted in, leads to weakness of mind, sounds familiar, general lunacy, and homicidal mania. These individuals who partook in this new thing become a prey to a thirst for homicide.
What year was this?
1894.
I don't know. This one's got me stumped.
Bicycles. This
Oh,
is what you
there's
said.
the bicycles.
So what was you said you picked up an anecdote about bicycles before, or that was your guess?
That was
actually,
my
is what it
guess.
was,
I
yeah.
guessed because it was around the same.
Yeah, it's around the
Yes.
same time.
Interesting. But they said strike from afar, something. Oh, maybe a bicycle's flying down the street. I don't know.
Sure, who knows? But I mean, obvious fear, right?
Yeah.
These are literally headlines. Final one. We're going to come into a little bit more modern age, 1954. You can probably figure this one out. The headline from the New York Times at the time: a new menace to the minds of the young. This was said to cause passivity, intellectual sloth, and emotional disturbance in children. Also said it would short-circuit attention spans and weaken the ability to think critically. By the way, I just want to pause and say, there are literally headlines right now describing AI in that manner for children with developing minds. What is this thing from 1954?
Talking about the TV?
It's talking about
Yeah.
the TV, the new menace of the minds of the young. Now, maybe that one, Maybe that one we don't disagree with too much. Maybe we're not 100+ years separated from it, but interesting though, at the very least.
I know. Well, yeah. I mean, and in one way, it's like they're like electricity there can
very
be
dangerous.
There can be right,
can absolutely kill you.
Don't put your finger in the socket, right? There are real there is some reason behind it, so I don't want to like
and
the reading
ways
the
to
novels that
respond.
doesn't seem to make
well
any
sure
sense. But
they can't all be fantastical.
But like yes, with every new technology, there is some valid fear or danger. But that's why we created laws around driving. That's why we wear seatbelts. That's why we create all of this around it. But
Absolutely.
If we were to turn away and ignore the technology, it would be...
I would just like to propose, imagine a world where we turn away from novels, telephones, electricity, bicycles, and television. Well, some beget the others, but we wouldn't be here right now. No. You and I wouldn't.
I was just reading, so the book I'm reading right now is Super Agency by Reid Hoffman. And his book, and he tells this story.
Reid Hoffman, LinkedIn Reid Hoffman. Very involved in the AI debate.
Yes.
Lately.
Yeah. He has a couple podcasts and he's talking about it a lot.
That one didn't show up as Optimist on your book evaluation, I bet.
No, it did.
Okay,
he's a techno-optimist.
Yeah,
yes.
Gotcha.
But he paints this really interesting picture. So he tells the story of the Luddites, of course, like people familiar with
people hear about Luddite, but they don't know it's the real Luddites. Talk about that.
Right. So the Luddites were, a group of people in England. This is around the Industrial Revolution, right? They saw the new machinery coming in, right, and it was the machinery that was going to take over their jobs in the weaving, right. So this had to do with creation of weaving.
Electric
textiles.
looms were some of the first to emerge in the Industrial Revolution. Yep.
Exactly, and so there was a man, I can't remember his first name, but his last name was Ludd, right, and he was kind of the leader of this group of revolutionaries who just said, no, we're not gonna have our jobs taken from us, and they started, forming these groups. In the midnight, they would go and they would burn down factories or, demolish, and I think they even murdered a factory owner. Like, wow. I mean, if you look in our history, it actually gets quite violent. But regardless of that,
these things are happening now.
Yeah.
Like reactions to technology, we're burning things down. I mean, it's literally happening in present day. It's crazy.
Right, and that's why it's important to look at the history as we've been doing here, because, like, honestly, like, we haven't, like, we've changed and we modernized, but we go through these same cycles, and we there's the same reactions.
Well, just last year, there was a very public news cycle item of a dock workers union that was renegotiated, or was really, they were going on strike, is why it made all the headlines, because they said, well, we want to renegotiate with our employers, the union wants to renegotiate their terms, because the docks were starting to become fully automated, and they were essentially saying, we need to keep having humans do these jobs, whether they're less efficient or not. That might be the perfect facsimile of the Luddite in the Industrial Revolution, because how long can that persist before eventually just efficiencies and scale come into play, and those decisions become steamrollingly obvious, right?
Right.
So,
and in the story, in the actual story of the Luddites, right, the English government eventually, tamped down on this, and they
trade schools emerged, and literally deliberate activity, like literally the trade school concept came out of that time period, because they said, well, we do have to take a responsibility as a society, as how do we retrain folks. We can't just say, good luck. You used to, weave, textiles. Now you're just out of a job. No, let's figure out what else to do. And people often talk about how it's like 65% of the jobs today did not exist at the time of this period of time that we're talking about. So, we're promising history or futures of abundance, but I think also the idea of new, careers and opportunities certainly can emerge as these technologies do.
Exactly. And so in the book, though, Reid, he puts this little fictitious, he's like, imagine that the English decided that the Luddites won, right? So the British government decided, okay, we're going to enact a law that says we're not going to, we're going to prohibit any technology unless it has been proven that it's 100% absolutely safe, right? So, and then he, this fictitious idea of what the world would have looked like. And the picture he paints, of course, it's fictitious. We don't really know, but that the rest of the world, right? It's like technology goes on the way it did. And there's an invention of cars and trains and, and TV and everything. And that the England, keeps, that new technology. No, electricity. No, we got to get rid of that. We got to get rid of that. So what happens is all these, they're making these beautiful blankets and they're beautiful.
The best blankets
They're more
in the
like
world.
the Amish, right? And
Yeah.
nothing wrong with the Amish. Like, I think that's wonderful and beautiful, but I cannot imagine our whole world being like the Amish and what that would actually do. Like, I'm actually very comfortable in my modern life. And because of the modern life that we live in, it's due to technology. And innovation.
It's such an interesting thought experiment, Kate. I mean, I really think if you're very pessimistic, present company excluded, of course, you should really look at your environment. Look at these creature comforts that you've gotten so used to. And I think you'll find that AI has already bled into some of the things that you rely on and think are useful. So I love that. Love the Luddites. I know that's a pejorative term as well these days, but really looking at where that came from and knowing that there's and that thought experiment is really kind of interesting. That's a fun journey. Now, from an AI perspective, that same part of the world is probably the most resistant to AI from a legislative standpoint anywhere in the world. Save for China, who they really just care about what's happening internally, not their outward facing in the world. But if you look at early AI restrictive legislation, not even responsible AI. This is a different thing. This is just restrictions on AI and some of the attempts that were happening here in the United States. What ended up happening is, can you name all of the AI model creators out of Europe right now?
Well, we've got Mistral.
Yeah, that's it. That's your. I mean, I've saved for a few, but Mistral, I believe is what the correct term is. Like you said, they're the ones, and they emerged out of France before these restrictions. And so have you seen a proliferation of new model builders? No, you haven't seen that. So it's an interesting experiment just in the short term, even when you look at the restrictions that way. So.
Yeah, and the EU AI Act, I know that it's, when it's going to go full, I think it's still another few years before it goes into full effect. But I was just looking at something the other day that they've released this new guideline, which is, so here's the law, and then the framework is the guidelines is how to apply. And the EU AI Act really applies to the foundation models more so than anybody, right? And so the companies that have signed the list to comply with these frameworks and before, this time is ready. I mean, Google's on that list, OpenAI is on that list. So
all the big ones.
So all the big ones are complying. And I think
but just to be clear though, they're not changing their California-based models to worldwide to fit these restrictions. They're going to have different restrictive models.
That's true.
Deployed in those places. So
that's true.
I think it's actually Reed's experiment that will play out if that ends up being the case. I mean, we don't even have to speculate. We'll just kind of wait and see what happens.
Right.
But again, I'm not prescribing full-on YOLO, risk be damned.
Right.
Which, as a matter of fact, what we really want to leave people with here today is prescriptive advice as to how to be successful with AI pilots. And we talk about pilots. I think one of the most useful papers of the year came out towards the end of last year. It was called the MIT NANDA, GenAI Divide is what they were framing up there. It was one of their state of the AI reports. A lot of organizations do this. Whenever the MIT one comes out, I love jumping all over it. So before we get into what the report actually says, because it actually had great nuggets, you can say, well, these are why some things fail, but this is also telling us why some things don't fail. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave decision makers with the rest of our conversation here today. We're going to focus on how to do the things so your pilots don't fail and you can move them into production. But before we get to that, just to touch on the headlines one more time, when the MIT NANDA, you and I talked about this on LinkedIn, so I know you're chuckling because you know where I'm going with this, but when this report came out, and you can check it out yourself, draw your own conclusions, these are, if you do a web search right now and you put in the name of the paper, these are the top 5 headlines, okay? From Forbes, MIT finds 95% of GenAI pilots fail because companies avoid friction, whatever that means. AOL, which is a news source, says MIT report, 95% of generative AI pilots at companies are failing. That's it. No, nothing else. Entrepreneur magazine, most companies saw zero return on AI investments, says study. And then finally, I actually found one in the top 5 from a source called The Stack. It said, this is what the tone of the rest of our conversation is going to be. What CIOs can learn from MIT's AI report beyond the doomsday overhype? So they just straight up went at it. So the point is, like, deep in this paper, it said 95% of the pilots that they addressed in this survey of actual business users and executives, a pretty large swath of a survey here, said that they failed, and then the reason was, why are they failing, and how can they succeed? So if you just stop at 95% fail, you're not going to learn anything from this paper, right? So I mean, your thoughts on that? It's like the perfect headline.
Yeah, I mean, it feeds back into that, the doom and gloom, and I know we'll put this in the show notes, but I found a research paper, that actually demonstrates, like the research that people have done on negative AI headlines, right? And there's something like, if you analyze all AI headlines, like the majority just go negative, and
like that experiment I was telling you about.
And so okay, so that's the first thing to keep in mind, right? And then right, you have to just dig deeper. And I just had another thought of a new tool I could build, which is, imagine if you just took the contents of the paper and put it into ChatGPT and said, come up with a headline, a realistic headline, because we've been comparing, but I'm like, well, what if I had AI generate a new headline for me? Ignore this headline, so I'd have to maybe like crop it out so it has no way of like even seeping in there. Because this is obviously meant to catch attention, to provoke fear, to tell a story, right? But like,
sure.
But
well, but the problem is if you just look at the headline and you send it off to somebody and say, "See, AI is terrible," and they actually read it, they'll be like, "Hey, I thanks for sending this. This was actually really useful."
Yes,
because it wasn't at all in any way, shape, or form negative. So I mean, well, let's dig in on some of these examples, because I think it's really important that people understand, okay, forget our perspectives, like what are out in the world, what are successful companies doing to deploy? And what that really means is move pilots from a pilot into production. And the first thing to take away from 93% of AI pilots fail is, we call them experiments, again, because I came from more machine learning into AI, and we kept that machine learning. Let's do an experiment first to prove that we can do this. And then from there, start talking about implementation and integrating it with workflows. But that's what a pilot's supposed to be. Just does this work or not? And, it doesn't work is actually just as useful as to what knobs you go tweak to go get it to work. So it's a weird metric to just look at on its own to begin with.
Right.
But the first part is really it's when you're even designing the pilot, when you're deciding what your experiment is going to be in the first place. What everybody said here is pilot design your pilots with the end in mind. Start small and then aim big. And this kind of talks about us not trying to YOLO against a language model with one big prompt. That's a little too big. Start off with the really small ones. When you think about using AI deliberately rather than opportunistically, like what helps clarify whether a pilot is actually worth doing in the first place, in your perspective?
So, I mean, I'm leaning back on, this another book that is coming to mind right now, Lean Startup, right? So that's like classic business, right?
I've got it on my bookshelf. If I was in my desk right now, I could just go like this and point to it on the shelf. Yep.
So what's the primary lesson in that book is that learning is the most important, asset. Like that's the goal, is to learn, right? So how do we learn if we're not actually doing, right? So we have to get out there and do. And like the paper says, starting small. It's like, don't try and, take on, the whole business. Just pick one area, right?
It's exactly what they say, by the way, Kate. They're saying, as a matter of fact, define it as small as possible with the outcome in mind. So, like, for example, they're saying, be concrete about your outcomes. First of all, I hear a lot of people talk about like tests or they'll say POC, and I know what they're actually doing. Like, I would say this. If you're running an experiment, which you should run many experiments, and most of them should likely fail. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to learn anything. You learn if they don't. But if you're able to demo it to somebody, you might be doing it wrong. That might be too wide of a swath. There shouldn't really be a workflow. A lot of times these don't even need UIs. A lot of times the outcome of an experiment is just, did this work? Yes or no? And what did we learn? So for example, and then if you really want to tie that to ROI to be successful, here's examples that the paper says. For example, you might define a pilot by saying, reduce tier 1 support handling time by 50% via an AI-assisted triage, or automate invoice processing to cut outsourcing costs by $5 million a year. They're tying the goal, the specific thing they're trying to achieve, to the ROI and why it's meaningful. I think that alone, out of all these tips, you just define your pilots that way, and you're probably going to see more success, because what happens if they're successful? Well, you can put them into production. I think what happens is a lot of people defined just fun experiments, and then even if they were positive and they worked, there was no connect the dots to how you actually put it into production, so there it fails right out the gate.
Yeah. Okay. So two things are coming to mind. First, there's another paper that I looked at from the Tata Consultancy Group, right? So they're a big.
Oh, I know Tata. Yeah, I've encountered them in one of our client deployments. Actually.
Yes. Indian-based but global. And so they did their own.
Moving into the U.S.
Yes. So they did their own studies, and they came up with a North American study, in AI in business. And what they found was one of the key, missing. Right, is like, how do we do this successfully? Was like, what are those metrics? Like, it's like, how do we measure? And so that aligns perfectly with what that report is saying.
No question. And by the way, different from evals. We're not talking about acceptance criteria. I mean, we kind of are, but you're really talking about, if this works, how do we as an organization benefit?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Not acceptability, but what our ROI would be on this effort.
And the second thing is, like, I don't know, so how familiar you are with the NIST AI risk management framework, right? Risk management framework. So NIST, so that's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, right? So this is a government organization. And this, they came up with this framework. Now, this was released in 2023, I think. It's a voluntary framework, but it has 4 components to it. The 4 components are govern, map, measure, manage. Now, this has to do with risk, but these components can be applied right on any level. And if they have this playbook, this is all free. It's all voluntary. And I think, here's my future bet, is that this is going to become more than voluntary. So right now, the state of Texas, we're in Texas.
Yep.
January 1st, a new law went into place. It's called TREGA, right? It's the Texas Responsible AI and Governance Act.
We've got a couple state and local government deployments here that we had to stop everything and see how TREGA impacts things.
Right. So we're having to. So in TREGA, if you are adhering by the NIST AI RMF, you're kind of exempt. So all you have to do is follow this framework. Now, they've built the framework in a way it's flexible. Like, it's voluntary. You don't have to do anything. I know I'm kind of mixing things when I talk about laws, and I don't want to get into too much in the weeds here.
But a law references a framework, so it kind of fits perfectly.
Exactly. But if you really look at this and dig down, and this is what we do at Violet Beacon, right? We're helping people actually adapt to some of these frameworks. So the NIST one. There's also an international ISO 42001, But what they do is they provide you with, it's really amazing, with the list of key metrics. So it's like, it gives you a whole guide. So you're not sitting there guessing in the dark, right? It's like, oh, you have the exact framework questions, in a very structured way to help you, make sure that you're doing all those things. But when I look at those 4 components about, govern.
So the 4 are, again, govern,
map. So mapping is like mapping the risks, right? It's like, well, what is actually, what could go wrong, right? So what do I need to pay attention to? Measure is,
measure is what we're talking about here. Like, literally, how is this going to benefit? I mean, I don't know from a risk standpoint, but we could also map that, so to speak, to, well, how is this going to benefit your organization as well, too?
Right.
So mapping in both of them.
And then manage is like going back and applying, right? So if you measure and you come up with, oh, well, actually we need to adjust, then you go back and you're making, it's like, so it's that iterative process.
Yeah, and that speaks to our eval framework guidance from before as well, too. It's interesting. It also points to one of these other points. In the MIT paper, they also talked about ROI modeling and measurement, prove value or pivot fast. So when you think about a value from like a human perspective, what signals tell you that an AI system is actually helping, not just being used, for example?
Right. So, I mean, I think that does feed right back into the evals, right? And into the measurements, right? Is like, well, have we actually set our goals? Like, what are we actually hoping to achieve? And so that comes from like, having a framework. Like, you should have a set of guidelines of what you're actually hoping to accomplish, right?
Oh, for sure.
And I think that does get into that point where some companies are just like, oh, we got to implement AI to get ahead, to stay, it's like, no, you need to be really deliberate about
Well, you can say, oh my God, we think our competitors are using AI, we need to do something, but then immediately go into, well, what is it about us that could benefit from AI?
Yes.
And that way, and actually what was really interesting about the measurement basically fast failing.
Yeah.
Like, is this working or not? If not, then let's get out of here. Well, the easiest way to fail fast and be able to move on to the next thing is to pick really small things, right? So we talked about that earlier, aim small. I actually heard this at a conference I was at, an AI conference I was at in New York last year, where one of the guys said, you keep hearing about AIs coming for your job, or, I think the thing that everybody pretended was their own quote like 2 years ago was, AI is not coming for your job. Somebody using AI is coming from their job, attributed to like 1 million people. But this was an interesting take on it. AI is not coming for your job, just the parts of your job that you hate. And so to kind of back that up, in this study, it actually talks about how back office automation delivered the clearest path to ROI. So, 1 million per year they talk about in here saved on risk management, outsourcing, like things like you're talking about, by the way. You can actually, if you're implementing risk management, you can save. But if you look at just like the tiny little things you can fix, like you don't have to replace a job, just replace the rote activities that can actually be, it's the same kind of thing we talked about back in the automation and the digital, digitization era as well too. So, that completely feeds into what you said. And by the way, no better metric than the 1 million per year saved on risk management outsourcing. Hello. So the other part too, just kind of flying through a couple of these that are really important as well too is, and I think this kind of speaks to the experience that you and I have about building custom applications and workflows. It's really about your integration strategy. Embed, don't isolate the AI solution. So AI that sits behind workflows rarely scales, or on the side of workflows rarely scales. Start with a contained workflow, kind of like what we talked about before. Or a data source, rather than integrating everything all at once. So hybrid architectures here. So then when you look at it from a human intelligence standpoint, what makes an AI tool feel like a natural part of someone's work instead of something that's bolted on, do you think?
Well,
because that's really it. That's where the rubber meets the road on that.
And,
right?
and this is where I think, taking the responsible AI approach involves kind of setting a culture and tone as well. We haven't like really touched on the people aspect of this, but those are real. It's like, am I going to lose my job? And so with these frameworks, but also as a concept of responsible AI, there's mechanisms built into these frameworks in a way that you involve the stakeholders, right? So you need your subject matter experts, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're the ones who should be evaluating it, right?
They should be part of defining your pilots too, by the way, is what this paper is telling us. So that's important.
So there's this, one of the concepts in responsible AI is around accountability. And that comes from like, we need to be the ones making the choices about where we want to implement AI, how we want to let it make decisions, how we want to evaluate it. Like that all needs to come from us. Like I don't think we need to,
within your organizational structure too. As a matter of fact, Kate, one of the takeaways here is exactly what you just said: organizational ownership.
Yes.
So define ownership. Someone must be accountable for the outcomes in production.
Yep.
And I think it could easily be done. Like easily, you could say that this is an IT job. Well, no, actually, go to the individuals who experience the benefit or not, in their current workforce, and let them actually take ownership of this. So, real validation of exactly what you're talking about there. So I guess our pro tip there is, when you're designing your pilots, assign it ownership of the pilot and accountability of its success to, or failures or whatever, to someone that can actually then do something about it and move a pilot into production. So again, mapping to some, the right people there.
And leadership plays a big role in this too, because they're the ones setting the tone for the culture. And that's a big part, both of the ISO 42001 and the NIST, is like making sure that leadership is involved, right? Their ownership in this as well, because it's going to come down from the organization, from the lead.
Yeah, the paper actually says successful organizations decentralize authority while keeping accountability, i.e., a line manager ownership plus executive sponsorship
Yes.
involved. And by the way, just to toot our own horn, I couldn't get through a whole podcast without quoting this one. It indicates that strategic partnerships achieved 67% deployment success, while internal only builds only 33%, and employee usage rates were nearly double in externally developed systems. We're here at a podcast studio where they just told us that they're, heavily involved in tech, and they started by building it themselves internally, but then when they moved out to partners, they were able to get it into production. So maybe, a similar type of approach there. Also, I think you'll appreciate this. Those end users who we know are so important when you're building your workflows and your custom applications out, the paper identifies them as prosumers. These are employees that already are using ChatGPT or Claude personally and could be key champions on a bottom-up sourcing of the use of internal. So one of the pro tips I'll give right out of the gate, and I say this all the time for executives that want to know how to get into this. Number one, take inventory and what prosumers you might already have within your organization. They might surprise you. It might be somebody that's completely low tech in their work efforts, but they're your biggest pro user of AI, and you can actually learn from them and get them involved in some of these pilots, right?
Yeah.
A couple other thoughts to kind of get through some of the big ones here to make sure we're giving some really good nuggets. This one I know you'll appreciate. Feedback loops. As an ML guy, the world of AI, really what fascinated me was human reinforcement and having humans in the loop in the most effective manner. And I know this is a critical part of your human intelligence positioning. So in the paper, it says, make AI systems improve over time instead of stagnating. I don't think most people know you can even do that.
Right.
By introducing state and memory into your AI
Yes.
deployments. So for you, when you look at like human intelligence and humans and AI working together, what kind of feedback mechanisms do you feel are most natural for people to be able to give feedback, and probably most useful for the systems to learn too?
Right.
I mean, we're used to thumbs up, thumbs down, but it doesn't stop there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it of course has to be built into the workflow, right? So it has to be natural, right? The way we think about giving feedback. So, even if it's just, and that's the great thing about with LLMs, right? It can just be generic notes. It can just be thoughts like, how would I give feedback? But having that binary, like yes, no, actually works really well for evals, because there should be a very clear definition. Yes, this is right. No, this is wrong, right? And so giving that kind of feedback to an LLM, like you talked about, in training, right, is actually extremely valuable. But I think from the human perspective, always making sure that there's a place to give feedback, right? And so even if that's, a mechanism in organizations for a place to log incidents if there's something that happens, right? And you're like, oh wait, this wasn't supposed to happen. Like that,
Well,
all
that's
of that needs
super
to be.
important. That's going to feed back into your
Yes.
traceability, because I can tell you that my development team, when we built traceability, like we literally have. First of all, this is kind of interesting. We used to have thumbs up, thumbs down, and we completely got rid of thumbs up because,
Yeah.
they should all be thumbs up, right?
Yeah.
So what we really want to know is when the
Right.
workflow or the model responses diverge from your expectations. So we went with
Right.
just thumbs down, and just like you said, a little button that you press that
Yeah.
then you put your notes in, and in our trace logs, we're assigning it exactly to the turn in the conversation if it's a chat where that happened.
Cool.
And it really gives our developers everything they need, and it gives our users a way to actually explain what they were expecting and maybe, what the gap was there.
Right.
And some of the stats that support this, Kate, are from this paper. 95% of enterprise AI pilots fail. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the headline. I'm just going to stop right there. But it says, because, this is why you should read papers, because systems don't retain feedback, adapt to context, or improve over time. So we're here to report they absolutely can.
Right.
And it's a fundamental mechanism
Right.
to building a good AI systems. This paper found that 2/3 of executives now require AI tools that learn and remember.
Yeah.
Feedback isn't nice to have. It's the line between the 95% of these pilots that fail and the 5% that don't. I mean, that's really it, right? And I
Right.
guess people don't know that you can bring feedback in. I'll give a really practical example, if I may. A software team that I'm working with who's building an AI tool would only approach a turn as in a user asking something, and then they just go find the answer. So honestly, it wasn't really like feeding into the nuance of of what the AI nuance and what LLMs can really bring into a workflow. Instead, what it was doing is looking at it as a question answer machine. And by the way, I would caution, if you think AI is a question answer machine for business in particular, you're doing it wrong. I'm just going to take a hard line on that. So in this case, they said, well, the user says, well, what's my best performing product, for example? And the AI is giving them an answer, and they're like, well, that's not, I don't consider those to be my best products. And then, so the software team was like, well, why don't we have a little window that pops up where they can type in what they mean by best? And I said, hold on, why not just have the LLM be trained, instructed to ask the user when there's ambiguity. So they introduce a follow-up question into the turn, which is standard, and they saw their eval metrics actually, I think in this case, double. I just heard them a couple of days ago. So by simply allowing the LLM to follow up when there's ambiguity and ask the right question, I mean, language models have a bunch of right answers, right, Kate?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
we kind of have to tune them properly.
Exactly. We're learning how to use this tool, right?
It needs to learn what we want. So the more it can learn about our users, and that's what this whole feedback loop thing is about, the better it's going to perform.
Right.
I mean, I can tell you from the field, that's definitely the case. Yeah. So far, what we've been telling decision makers and executives is design your pilot with the end in mind. Mm-hmm. Integrate and don't have it isolated, like not a chat on the side, or have it integrated into your workflows. By the way, to kind of support the Salesforce concept, deep in the paper, it does describe that if you go into your systems of record and do integration, you'll likely see more success. That's kind of that kind of makes sense thing. The higher use applications will get higher use, outputs, but I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to put together. But they said for high stakes workflows, a deterministic spine with the AI at the edges outperforms pure generative autonomy. That, I think, is a huge takeaway here, right? We talked about feedback loops, and that leaves us with and then organizational ownership as well. But there's there's one that I want to throw in as a bonus. Because we're data people, and then I know you had another bonus as well too. We can end with these two bonuses and a little bit of a wrap up here. But here's what my bonus use case is that I found, Kate. I found another MIT. I was literally sitting at entertaining myself at dinner by myself last night, and I found a report, some headline. I don't know what the headline was. I should have grabbed it, but it got my attention. It was about an MIT report, and this report said around 60% of it says most companies are spending aggressively on AI, but the majority are not seeing meaningful financial returns. Of course, that caught my eye. Around 60% report minimal revenue growth and cost reduction despite heavy investment. However, this report noted that a small group of AI leaders stood out, roughly 5 times the revenue gains and 3 times the cost savings compared in this report to the ones that failed. What did they have in common? Well, in their case, their key differentiator, Kate, was foundational readiness. The future build companies invest early in data infrastructure and core capabilities that allow AI to work responsibly and reliably. So what we were saying there is they're going back to basics. So the CEO takeaway here, the decision maker takeaway I would offer, what are your thoughts on this, is go look at your data. In some of our early deployments, I admit I mistakenly thought LLMs could overcome bad data. Not true. So now we go in and do a data discovery, take inventory of the data. Is it clean? Is it reliable? How can we address these things? And sometimes the answer might be we need a multi-month project just to deal with our data and our capture before we can actually rely on LLMs, because it's kind of a garbage in, garbage out thing, right? I mean, this is no different than the custom business applications we've created in the past, right?
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. I mean, another report, the same one I mentioned earlier, the Tata Consultancy report.
Oh, yeah.
That they were quoting the same thing, that, in looking at where companies are in their progress of, adopting AI, that there was a significant portion in just preparing their data, right? Because, and so back to that MIT report, because I think they only looked at 6 months, right? And it's like, that's also a short period of time. And so that's going to, there's all these little factors, there's like this term interrogating research, and like going in and looking at all that. Another thing about the MIT report that I discovered when I was digging a little deeper is it wasn't actually produced by MIT, right? There's a company, or not a company, an organization called NANDA.
Yeah, it was a NANDA report.
Right.
Yeah.
And NANDA isn't technically part of MIT. It's formed with people. But what NANDA is doing is they're working on building standards, right? Similar to MCP, if you heard of MCP.
Yep.
I mean, of
Anthropic's
course,
model
MCP,
context
Anthropic,
protocol.
A2A,
Yep.
right? So these are the standards that again, like this is when I say we're not in the
Assembly line. Great
yet,
call.
right?
I
Like
love that.
the standards are still coming together, so we don't have the perfect ways to implement these tools, and that's what a lot of these people are developing. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Back to that MIT report is thinking like, okay, well, what was the perspective of the people writing this report? Obviously coming up with like here's the direction we need to be headed, and we're not there yet.
Well, in fairness, they're the way the headlines were picked up on their own paper. I mean, they did say GenAI Divide, so they were trying to say we're creating the need for standards and an approach, and a lot of these speak to the types of standards that they're looking for too. So another thing we'll throw in the show notes there.
Yeah.
Was the Tata article the one that you were telling me this morning?
Yeah.
Great. I'm glad you got a chance to mention that one because I think that one was chock full of reinforcement here.
Yeah.
Kate, how do we bring this all home for folks? Let me just do a quick summary of what we learned here. So the decision makers out there, this is what we're saying. Well, first of all, don't just read the headlines, read beyond that.
Right.
But some of the rules and the takeaways that we see in these successful deployments were, well, working backwards, start with your data health first. Spend as much time as you need getting your data, healthy and structured before you bolt GenAI on from there. That's a big one. Also, you cannot express the thesis. If you cannot express the thesis as a CFO style equation, meaning what's your literal financial gain and output to this, it's probably not a pilot yet. You probably haven't formed it yet. Next, for high stakes workflows, a deterministic spine with AI at the edges will outperform pure generative autonomy. I think a really important approach. And then finally, well, actually, if you're not embedding AI into the system of record, adoption will be cosmetic. And then finally, build feedback capture into the UI, not into a monthly survey. So meaning, hey guys, how effective was that AI that you use? Like do it at the moment, like you said so wisely, right there at that moment where the feedback actually emerges. So, and then I would actually add, find your prosumers. Go in on Monday morning and say, hey, everybody raise your hand if you use ChatGPT. I want to have a conversation with you about it, right? In closing, really this conversation was intended to not be about AI optimist or pessimist. It's about being operationally serious about success with AI, and it would be irresponsible for us to just talk about headlines and people's approaches to them and their interpretation without getting into the meat of it and looking constructively at how people can be successful. So one of the ways they can be successful, Kate, is to be able to work with outside. We saw, hey, twice the success rate, 2/3 success when you go with outside sources. So if people want to find you and engage you at Violet Beacon, and really, because a lot of what you're offering from a consulting standpoint are starting points, pre-pilots. So talk a little bit about how people can find you and how to get started with you on those things.
Okay, and I wanted to close. I have one more thought, because I realized as you were summarizing everything, we've touched on, like almost all of the pillars of responsible AI, right? It's accountability, it's transparency, it's, reliability, right? That's high performance. Those are the evals. But some of the other, privacy, security.
Oh, of course.
We didn't touch on those. But
which, by the way, I think is what people think that's all responsible AI is, when it's not. It's the other other things that you mentioned.
There's all these other things, and I think what draws me so much to responsible AI and to these frameworks, to the NIST framework and the ISO 42001, which again, this is what I'm using to help clients because it's a grounding. It's like, here, this is a process, this is a framework built by governments, non-government organizations, private individuals, private companies in a way that's like, okay, there's some basis, there's actual grounding in this. It gives you something to fall back on. It gives you those boundaries. It gives you those breaks, right? And so that like you have a safe boundary because the fears are real. And what I love about the definition of AI in the NIST is there's a long definition that ends with the goal is to create trustworthy AI.
Absolutely.
And that's what responsible AI is about. it's not ethical AI, which is a whole different thing.
Sure.
Whole different show.
Oh, yeah.
But responsible AI is about creating trustworthy AI. And I think that's what we've been trying to get to is like, here are the tools. Like there is a way to do it. The headlines are missing the point here, right?
Great call.
So I wanted to throw that.
It's all about trust. As a matter of fact, our headlines are fear. We covered fear. Trust, how do you gain trust, and how those become the playbook for successful deployments. We did it.
Right.
But I will say my trust equation, by the way, is relevance, accuracy, and evidence. Something we can talk about in a later conversation, but trust isn't just one trust. How do we get at trust? You have to make sure you have accuracy, but it goes beyond that. Is it relevant to me and contextually relevant to me? And then can I see within the UI evidence of where this information is coming from? So to kind of bookend the point that you're making. And so that seems to be a good starting point for people strategically. And if they want to start with you, where can they find more information about how to get engaged?
They can visit me at violetbeacon.com. I'm active on LinkedIn. I'm working on activity in other places, but those are the best places right now. And I do have a blog called Human Intelligence.
I love it, by the way. I wanted to make sure you got that out there.
Yes.
Check out Kate's Human Intelligence series, really.
Yep.
And you share that on LinkedIn as well, too. I enjoyed it a lot. Really, a lot of the conversations you and I have, I see that in there as well, too. You just dropped one this morning, as a matter of fact. An exploration on the headline reading is part 2. So great follow. And of course, I'm Cris Ippolite. You can find me at iSolutionsAI pretty much anywhere. This was really fun for me, Kate. I've been looking forward to having a conversation with you. It's fun to be here in Austin, your native area. I look forward to our next chat, certainly, but really appreciate you having this conversation with me. We could talk for hours on this, certainly, for sure. So
this is awesome. Thanks for having me on, Chris. I'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Cheers. Thank you.